Hi, everybody. Good afternoon to the Lunch and Learn Soul Food. I hope that you can hear me. I'm wearing a newfangled headset. I'm not really sure. Continuing to learn in Sefer Misil Aisharim. Of course, it's not lost on me that we have a long way to go in this book, and I'm not really 100% sure if this weekly, which hasn't turned out to be weekly, class is actually doing what I wanted it to do. Going to be going back to the drawing board to think about this in terms of learning this book and the way that we learn the great books together. Over the summer, I'm going to be thinking about whether or not going page by page, theme by theme, is the smartest way to actually to work with the Mesil Esharim, and that might also be true for other Sfarim, other books that we choose to learn together. It might be better to take a tamsit, or to take meaning to lift out the central core principles of the Mesil Esharim and other books and other Sfarim, in order to make them relevant and meaningful, and to create a curriculum maybe of how one would use the book. So I'm open to any and all ideas. You can always contact me at rabbi@rome.org, or reach out to the office. There isn't a huge following of this class itself. I mean, for each person, it's really an amazing thing that you're joining us to learn. But given that the class is not hundreds and hundreds of people, it's really more than a little bit relevant for any of you who have been watching or have been learning with us for the past year, to reach out and give some feedback. And it's more than likely that something will come from that feedback. I've already received, from some of you who've emailed me some good feedback on how to make it a better half hour together or so. And after coming to the beginning of May and then June, that means that we don't have that many more classes together. I'm already thinking about next year and how we'll do it. And it might include doing weekly installments, a half hour a week, but instead of missing the weeks where I've been away, we have the technology, and we might be able to tape classes in advance, and just do a number of taped classes in advance that aren't live, but that can be then aired during the 1 hour, during the 1 o'clock lunch hour for a half hour. And so you can get a good dose of Torah during the middle of the day. So I'm welcome the four of you who I see or three or four people who are watching now. We were at the end of the Midat HaZehirut, and the Chalkei HaZehirut, looking at the different pieces of this first level of the Braita of what it is to grow, to set up a hierarchical or developmental unfolding or evolution into the higher states of awareness within our tradition. And here we have the Zehirut, which is the first level, which is basic awareness. We talked about mindfulness within the context of the Mesilat Yesharim's worldview, and the worldview of the Ramchal. Zehirut would become a catchword for being aware of places where you're in alignment with God's will and places where you're not. I think that for the author, for the Mechaber, for the author of this book, in his way of describing it, he describes how a lack of mindfulness, a lack of awareness, can lead to a kind of darkness, and that within darkness itself, there can be a vision issue of being able to see what's in front of you. And he says there are two major obstacles, or two derivatives of being in the dark. One is that being in the dark can lead you to not see at all what is in front of you, which he says is one very clear ramification for being without light. But the other ramification, he says, which is even worse, is that you imagine you see something that is actually not there, or you distort what it is that's actually there by seeing something else in its place. And that's where he said that the lack of zehirut, the lack of being able to see what's in front of you, you have to be really mindful of increasing your zehirut so that you see clearly. But then ultimately, right, so in the beginning of chapter 3, he says there are two perspectives, there are two things you have to take into consideration. What is the appropriate, what is is truly good, and then looking at your actions to see if they're in the category of good that you've established. And he said that's during the action itself, when you're in the moment, and then doing a cheshbon nefesh, an accounting of your soul after the action. So kind of basically action and then evaluation of your action. But he says you're also evaluating while you're in the action. Is this really what God wants? He says to be ma'ayin u'mefakech al kol drechav. He says to be deeply. I'm on page 36, but we're going to come back to where we left off. I did do a little bit of a review. You have to be ma'ayin u'mefakech al kol drechav shelo yanich la'atzmo hergel ra mida ra'a kol sheken avera b'fesha. It says this is like the beginning of the spiritual path for a religious Jew, and then I think that we're going to expand this to include any spiritual practitioner. Is that not only is it clear that you want to be leading a wholesome life in terms of the gross level, but even the vibration that is a little bit more subtle, that is more intentional, not actional, right? Not assuming here in his worldview that to eat, non-kosher food is already obviously something that you have to be careful not to do. But for his world, that would be a pollution in his world. But an even deeper level of awareness would be, what is your intention when you're eating kosher food? Right? It's not enough for him to begin mindfulness at the level of the gross, where you're not committing what are called averot or transgressions, or you're out of alignment. But what's your intentionality? What are your character traits? Are you a naval b'rshut Torah, to use Nachmanides' very intense language? Are you a glutton by permission of the Torah, right? Like, so your overt life is that you're a religious individual, quote unquote, but you're mean, or you're nasty, or that you do things with a sense of ego or hubris. Those are all things that the Ramchal is beginning to say. You work from the gross level to the more subtle level, even within mindfulness, right? Becoming aware of, are you a good father? Are you a good brother? Are you a good boss? Are you a good employee? All of these are kind of roles and activities in the world. But what's the deeper place of being mindful? How can you develop mindfulness that isn't just satisfied with checking off a behavioral box, but what is the relationship between your mindfulness in behavior and also your mindfulness of your intentionality? And the Ramchal goes on to say that to some extent, being someone who's in the dark, or someone who doesn't see what's in front of them appropriately, essentially means that we are in a gan mivucha. We are in the famous analogy of the Ramchal. This world is like a gan mivucha, which is kind of in that period in pre-Renaissance Italy, and in throughout Europe, there were these mazes, maybe labyrinths, that were which were for both the gardening was done that way, but also was kind of a royal feature. There are many different walls. He describes talim kitalim, umbeinehem shivilim rabim, nivuchim umeoravim. Right? We live in a world, he says, this is the analogy, the allegory, that we are in a world that, like that garden maze, has many paths. And the goal of the garden maze is to be able to make it to not get lost. It's a common phenomena that you would get completely verblungen, you'd say in Yiddish, like completely lost. You have no idea how to get in and out. And in this allegory, you need someone who's already made it through the garden and to the other side to be able to give you direction on how to get out. So there's an element here, of course, he says that this world is like that, and we need experts, we need people who have gone through, we need people who are enlightened or awakened, right? If they're still stuck in the garden, it would be almost impossible for them to get you out. And it's almost impossible for you to get out. Now, I'm going to contrast this for a moment with a well-known Hasidic story where more than 2 centuries later, a Hasidic teacher once said that a story about being in a forest and meeting another person in the forest after having wandered in the forest for days, and seeing this person, he was so relieved, and he said to him, "I'm so happy I see you. Now we'll be able to get out of the forest." And he says, "No, I too have been wandering for days, but at least maybe now we'll be lost together." Now that might point to a much a later phenomena in Hasidic literature and the period it was in, where truth was even more elusive to some degree. And the Hasidim recognized that there was great importance in being able, at least being lost together. And what also comes to mind is the story, the parable of Nachman of Breslev, who spoke about a certain king whose advisors came to him and said that the wheat had been poisoned, of the wheat harvest that year had been poisoned, and the well had been poisoned. There was no water to drink, and that wasn't poisoned, and told that the king, that luckily enough the king had his own water and he didn't have to drink from the poisoned water or the poisoned wheat. Different stories, and it would remain untouched, even though everyone would be crazy, right? That the wheat had that effect on people. And the king said to his advisor, "No, I too am the leader. I have to eat the wheat just as my people will. But you and I will place dots on our foreheads, and we will know that we've eaten from the wheat." So to know you're lost is better than not knowing that you're lost. But it seems in those Hasidic stories that being lost might be a human condition that's unavoidable. But at least we have sochbet, we have dibuk chaverim. We can at least be together in sangha or in sibur, in community, and our job is just to know that we're lost, and maybe that's a great moment. But here in the Ramchal's worldview, there are great teachers who have made it to the other side, as it were, who have been awakened. And certainly that's the tradition, the dominant tradition in I think in all traditions that value a guru or a rebbe or a leader. Hopefully the leader has been to the other side and knows how to get us out. A good therapist, right, is a therapist who's also, to some degree, has a little bit of spaciousness maybe around some of the issues that we bring. Probably don't want to necessarily be with a teacher or a therapist who's struggling with the exact same thing that you are without having moved a little bit further than you or me, and maybe. But certainly in the Ramchal's worldview, there is an awakened path, and the ones who have been on the outside of that maze can give us good advice on how to get out of the maze. And so for the Ramchal in his worldview, that would be Torah. That would be the way of the Torah, the way of the rabbis of the Talmud, the Chazal, our rabbis, our wisdom teachers, and that it would behoove us, even though he's in both imploring us to have zihirut, to be mindful, he's also acknowledging the limits of our own mindfulness. Right? I'm often think of the work of Ken Wilber and some of his brilliant work. And one of the most brilliant things that Wilber points out in a number of places is that, for the most part, Eastern and Western contemplative and introspective paths have been incredible in giving practitioners access to inner states of awareness and consciousness. But one of the things that Freud brought that was not available before Freud to some extent was the awareness that no matter how long you sit and watch your breath, or sit and daven to Hashem, or sit and do zikr to Allah, or read the rosary, count the rosary, or be a part of various forms of contemplative prayer, the stuff that happens in relationship won't surface there because you won't see it. The defense mechanisms are so strong that you can look all you want at your mind, but you won't be able to see the things that can only come up in shadow material projected onto the other. And the great insight of Ken Wilber was that first-person perspective or internal person, first-person language or first-person perspectives won't disclose what takes place in dialogical formats, so that you can have someone who is a very enlightened teacher, but who he won't see his stuff emerge unless he's in a relationship model that Freud spoke of, unless there's transference and countertransference, which is the way that we grow up. We're born into an intersubjective matrix. So in a way, the Ramchal here is saying, I'm talking about zihirut. I'm talking about mindfulness. I'm talking about awakening your capacity to both evaluate your actions before they happen, when they're happening, and afterwards. To check in on the gross level and on the subtle level to see what your mind was like during activities. Were you in balance? Were you being spiritually hungry and materialistic about your spiritual practices, or whatever it is? Right? It's wonderful to go to visit someone who's sick in the hospital, and the entire time that you're there, you can be thinking how great it is that you're there, like how special I am that I'm doing Bikur Cholim, that I'm coming to visit the sick. Now, that shouldn't inhibit, that shouldn't in any way obstruct you from going to do the good deed. But Ramchal wants to bring mindfulness. But here, in this allegory, this wonderful example, the Ramchal basically says that you're going to need help, that we all need help, right? And goes on to say, in the last paragraph on page 42, I hope you have this text, page 42. Says, if someone is still in the throes of their what is called the evil inclination, or within the self-deceptive capacity that we all have to not know the truth, or I would say I think slightly more compassionately, that is already hardwired in us, the defense mechanisms that make it very difficult for us to see ourselves with absolute clarity. He is still in, she or she is still in the shvilim. They're still in the narrow pathways within that maze, the shvilim, the paths of the maze. You don't know which is the right way to go sometimes. You can't see. But he says that the ones who already are on the outside of the maze, who are outside of this confusion, they see all of the paths, and we need to take advice from them. And I would add here, I'm pretty sure the Ramchal would not add these things, but I would want to add, whether it's Freud or Jung, or whether it's the Gra, the Gaon of Vilna, or the Baal Shem Tov, or whether it's the Rambam or the Ramban, or whether it's the people in the Gemara, whether it's the Buddha, or Shankara, or Shanti Deva, or whether it's Thomas Merton and Thomas Keating, whether it's Hafiz or Rumi or any of them, they are all in my book. And this is one of the deep teachings from my Rabbi Reb Zalman, Alav Shalom, that there are so many of these incredible wisdom masters who've made it outside of the maze, who can give us advice, who can help remind us of what's true. Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, they are all of them, those who carry the memory of what it is to leave the narrow place. V'omnam, mahi ha'etzah she'en notnin lanu. So let's look, therefore, what is the advice of all of these great wisdom teachers? What advice do they give us on how to leave? Bo cheshbon, bo nechashev cheshbono shel olam, ki kvar hem nisu v'ra'u v'yadu sheze levado hu haderech amiti la'agia adam el hatova shehu mivakesh lo zulat zeh. They say, let's all enter into an accounting, let's compute the world's account, let us all, they say, choose the true path that will bring us to what it is that we truly seek. Now, I won't say, again, as you know, all of you, my students who know me, I won't say that there is one path, but there is one, there is one truth, which is without the introspection and without the deep looking, we won't arrive. I'm not going to tell anyone which is the right brand, as it were. I believe in each tradition's beauty, and that all of them can get us to that place. And here in our tradition, in the Jewish tradition, here is his suggestion that the wisdom masters of our tradition, the Jewish tradition, say introspection is the first step, zihirut. Klalo shel davar, in the last paragraph on page 42, the general principle is that a person, we are required, we must, I hate to say we must, but it's a good suggestion to contemplate in our mind continuously, in every period and during fixed times, during our during our aloneness, during our meditation and solitude. מהו הדרך האמיתי לפי חוק התורה שאדם צריך ללכת בו ואחר כך להתבונן על מעשיו אם הם על הדרך הזה אם לא כי על ידי זה ודאי שיהיה לו נקל לטהר מכל רע וליישר כל דרכיו. Choose a path. What is the right path? Choose it. Use it as a standard by which to evaluate your own actions day in and day out. And in that way, you will have an easier time purifying yourself from all of the limitations and the crooked ways that keep us from being straight. The verse in Proverbs says, consider the path of your feet and all of your paths will be established. So in other words, Pales Malgal Regalecha means think of, like, establish a way to evaluate how you're living in the world. And then he quotes, and then and only then all of your paths will be established, meaning they'll be set up appropriately. V'omer, now he adds a second verse from Lamentations, Nach besad dirachkenu v'nach kora. Let us seek, let us search out our ways, investigating them, and then because of that, we will return to being itself, the source of life itself. We begin fourth chapter, B'be'ur kinyat hazihirut. And this is the concerning, or in an explanation of how to, the manner of acquiring the quality of zihirut, of being mindful. This is what generally will bring a person to mindfulness. Huli Mura Torah, studying Torah. אומנם על דרך פרט, המביא לזה הוא התבוננות על חומר עבודה שחייב באדם ועומק הדין עליה. ויצא לו מזה מן העיון במעשים הכתובים בספרי הקודש ומן הלימוד במאמרי חכמים זיכרונם לברכה המעוררים על זה. He says, listen, in the earlier teaching of the rabbis from which I am now drawing that there are these discrete stations, as it were, or rungs on the ladder of evolution. Torah is the first rung on the ladder. In fact, in the Breita, in the rabbinic dictum itself, which is what I'm basing my book on, before zihirut, before there is mindfulness, there is Torah. It actually, the first stage is called Torah, learning Torah, mivi'al lidei zihirut, that brings us to a place of zihirut, of mindfulness. So one would think that Torah, like if I'm learning Torah in yeshiva, learning Torah right now with Rabbi David, learning Torah, wherever I'm learning Torah, what do you mean? That's how we arrive at zihirut. That's what it says in the Breita. But Rabbi Ramchal is not going to say that. He quotes that, but then he feels the need to unpack what zihirut, what Torah itself means. It can't mean for the Ramchal that the magical repetition or recitation of Torah itself will bring one to mindfulness. Otherwise, he would have said that. He says, Omnam al derech prat, he says that which leads to it in particular is a reflection upon the demanding nature of divine service, right? And all of the various things that one has to that are required of a person. So it's not Torah per se, but it's these meditations or contemplations, these innerings, this inner place where one actually brings these thoughts to mind that will bring one to zihirut. Let's read that. Let's read what he says. V'hinei yesh b'hitbonenut hazeh ha'arot b'hadraga l'shleimei hadat l'pchusim mehem u'l'chol hamon kulo. Says there are three general levels: those who have wholeness of understanding, those who are of lesser understanding, kind of intermediates, and then the general population, right? This understanding of what are the various things that are required of us by God's law, here he means Torah, that itself, that contemplation, that awareness, that meditation on what is required of us will depend on who you are, right? Those who are what he calls shleimei hadat, those who are more wholesome, I would say these are like exceptionally advanced students, the intermediates and the beginners, right? He says the shleimei hadat. Telem ha'ara b'mashi b'erlem ki rak ha'shleimut or davar ha'oi shichamed mehem v'lo zulat zeh. ושאין רע גדול מחסרון השלמות הרחק ממנו. כי הנה אחר שהתבאר זה אצלם והתבאר להם כמו כן היות האמצעים אליו המעשים הטובים והמידות הטובות. ודאי הוא שלא יתרצו מעולם להמעיט באלה האמצעים או להקל בהם, כי כבר נתבאר אצלם שאם אמצעים אלה ימעטו להם, או אם אמצעים יהיו חלשים ולא בכל החוזק מצטרך בהם, הנה לא ישיגו בהם שלמות אמיתי אלא יגרע מהם, כפי מה שגערו מהם בהשתלדוסם, נמצאים חסרי השלמות, מה שהוא להם צרה גדולה ורעה רבה. Says this first category, these shlemei hadat, which means shalem means whole, complete. Dat is awareness or mind. Says these are the people for whom you don't have to use any extrinsic means to get them to log on to the value of leading a wholesome life. Like they don't need any props. They don't need any external methods. The deeper meaning of what it is to be wholesome to them is so evident. It's self-evident that sugar doesn't even taste good to them anymore, as it were, right? In the analogy of diet, like it's not like they love really unhealthy food, so you have to show them slides of what it's going to do to their arteries if they don't eat well. Like they already, you can just say to them, leading a healthy life will give you more energy, and sugar is poison. I'm just using it as an example. I'm not deriding sugar per se, but in his mind, there are those of exceptionally attuned spiritual antenna who feel that the distance, the more distant they are from enlightenment or awakening, the more their character traits are refined, the closer they are. And that itself is its own reward. They don't need to be in any way cajoled, or there's no strategy in order to get them to live the life of shlemut, of wholesomeness, right? Their responsibility, their sense of obligation is derived from their own inner sensitivity to how good that is, right? They feel like the closer they are to God, the closer they are to wholeness, that's all they want. So for the Ramchal, that's the first category of three in terms of what would motivate them or who they are, and how to bring to awareness what it is that they need to do in the world. The second category, the intermediate category, is described this way. You can go down to the bottom of the page, of page 46. Right? You can motivate someone according to zihirut, according to the cover that you give them. Says, listen, you can explain to those in the middle that in the world to come, the spiritual advantages of being a really high-level practitioner, you'll have a better seat in that synagogue, as it were. Isn't that crazy? So Chal says you can use extrinsic methods. Say, listen, maybe you don't get what it is, but you know that, in terms of this world, maybe you don't get that how delicious it would feel to be leading a wholesome life and close to God in this world. But in the next world, you're only going to have that, right? You're not going to have any of the things in this world, but you'll be closer to God if you do it. You'll have the kavod. You'll have that gravitas, that respect. You can acquire a lot of otherworldly reward points if you go and lead a really good life. And then the last of these categories, he says, he says, but there are some I want to skip the second category. I want to go on to the next category. Now, on the bottom of page 50, I don't know if you have this, the third category is your average person. Now, I'm going to stop here. And I'll say that, that each of these three types, this three typology, the typology of three different levels of motivation are really relevant to each and every one of us as well, because I don't know that it's not only is it out there in the world that there are different levels of motivational need and different levels in terms of what the subtlety of motivation, but within us too, at different moments of a day or a week. Sometimes leading a really wholesome life is clear, and we make choices based on that mindfulness. Sometimes we need to bribe ourselves and say, I might not feel how good it'll feel now, but it'll feel really good later on. And maybe people will see me this way, and that'll be a way to motivate ourselves to lead a more wholesome life. We can use that extrinsically. And sometimes we have to say, listen, it's going to hurt me if I don't lead the kind of wholesome life that I want to lead. I better scare myself a little bit. I think there's room for all three of those in terms of our own individual spiritual practices, right? You're not always going to realize how good it feels to work out. You're not always going to feel have absolute radical clarity that what you're doing will have long-term benefits in this world, in the next dimension, whatever it might be. And what you have to do is you have to scare yourself a little bit and say, it won't be good for my soul. It won't be good for my body. It won't be good for my heart. I think all of these are three different ways of being with ourselves. So on today, which is Tiferet Shebet Tiferet, it's the day of compassion within compassion, or balance within balance. I want to bless all of us with the capacity to know which of those three different strategies for motivation is up for us today. Right? How can you and I and each and every one of us be good advisors to ourselves and to our friends and to this world? Which strategy? Who are we speaking to today, or tonight, or tomorrow? And find the right words and find the right way in order to motivate ourselves to lead a life of mindfulness, of zihirut, of attentiveness, of consciousness, of awareness, of intentionality. May you be blessed, to have a wonderful day. And Hashem bless you in b'chol milei meitav, on only good things. And I'll see you soon. Okay. Be well. Many blessings.